"You're not allowed in the room," the intern said, her voice shaking as she tried to block my way. She stood there with the confidence of a paper towel holding back a flood. Behind her, the conference room was alive with clinking champagne glasses and fake applause. They were toasting Kelsey Monroe like she just cracked nuclear fusion with a slideshow. Through the frosted glass, I caught a glimpse of the slide on the screen. It was my work. My model. My math. I'd built it last quarter. And now it was being presented under her initials. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even sigh. I just looked at the kid gripping the door like it might attack her and said, "I built that model from scratch during the 2012 correction. Back when your boss was probably still tagging frat walls with dry erase markers." Then I turned around and walked off. My office was 5 doors down. I shut the door behind me and didn't open it again until midnight. 12 years. 12 years of being the guy they called when the systems crashed or the numbers refused to line up. When clients threatened to walk. When senior partners started sweating through their tailored shirts. Around Alton and Chase, my calm had turned into a kind of legend. Less a man, more a myth in wrinkled khakis and a navy pullover. I wasn't loud. I didn't dress like an Armani ad or pour Glenlivet during so-called bonding hours. But every time the market so much as twitched, they showed up at my door, asking me to save their polished behinds. And every single time I did. Quick pause before we go on. About 97% of you listen to these stories and never hit that little subscribe button. If this one hooks you or makes you want to yell at HR through your screen, tap subscribe and like the video. It helps more than you think. Back to me. At first, the whispers about fresh eyes and next-gen financial vision didn't bother me. Every firm has its quarterly midlife crisis. It usually ends with a new logo font and a memo about wearing jewel tones to seem more approachable. But this time felt off. Meetings got smaller. Invitations stopped showing up. My models were suddenly called robust but rigid. Accuracy took a back seat to agility. Then Kelsey Monroe arrived. 6-inch heels. A Hugo Boss blazer. Fresh out of Yale, armed with buzzwords and a smile bright enough to blind satellites. She was assigned to learn from me. Within a week, she was sitting in my meetings, repeating my work like she'd invented compound interest. Worse, the partners let it happen. They encouraged it. They actually clapped when she tossed out phrases like synergistic liquidity scaffolding, without even blinking. The same people who once needed me to explain EBITDA like they were toddlers now nodded along like bobbleheads at her recycled TED Talk lines. I didn't react. I stayed late, cleaned up her sloppy Excel logic, sent polite Slack messages pointing out mistakes. Most of them went unanswered. Then the closed-door meetings started. Twice a week. Sometimes more. Her. HR. 1 or 2 senior partners. After that came the access changes. Then the quiet removal of my workflow permissions. And then one day, the office manager casually mentioned I'd need to start parking in the surface lot instead of the garage. "New assignments," she said without looking at me. I wasn't stupid. The message was carved into the drywall. So I started preparing. Quietly. No drama. I backed everything up. Documented access logs. Tested system redundancies. I made copies of my internal policy drafts, compliance frameworks, and audit structures, the skeleton of the firm that no one else ever saw but everyone relied on. While they were planning my replacement, I was setting landmines. Legal ones. The kind you don't notice until your foot is already coming down, and the floor disappears beneath you. The breaking point came one Thursday afternoon, when Kelsey intercepted a client call meant for me, and gave the wrong hedging timeline to a $40 million portfolio. I corrected her. Softly. One-on-one. No audience. She went straight to the CEO and told him I was resistant to modern strategy. Friday morning, HR asked me to come in. They smiled the way used car salesmen do when they already know the deal is done. "She has a Yale degree," they said, calm and condescending, like my entire career could fit in a footnote. "You'll understand." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I nodded once, signed the NDA, and packed 12 years of my life into 3 cardboard boxes. No yelling. No speeches. Just the quiet sound of a man folding his loyalty into corrugated walls, while the firm that relied on his silence marched straight toward a storm. At 2 p.m., Daniel Mercer walked out of Alton and Chase with a flick of the wrist and no forwarding address. At 2:15 p.m., The CEO's assistant was running through the parking lot like her shoes were on fire, shouting my name. And me? I was already 3 blocks away. Calm, steady, watching the skyline shrink in my rearview mirror like it belonged to someone else now. Because it did. The first time I ever noticed Kelsey Monroe, she was arguing with a barista about the oat milk to foam ratio like the fate of Western civilization depended on it. Tight blazer. Not a wrinkle in sight. Teeth so white I swear they had their own LinkedIn profile. I figured she was a client. Maybe someone's niece tagging along for the day. I was wrong. By 10 a.m., she was being introduced at the Monday huddle as our new strategic analyst with a specialization in portfolio modernization and asset agility. Which, in normal English, meant she'd just come from Yale, thought she was the second coming of Warren Buffett in heels, and had skimmed enough McKinsey PDFs to clear a forest. Daniel, the managing partner said, clapping my shoulder like he was doing me a favor, we'd love for you to mentor her. Just for a few weeks while she gets acclimated. Right. Acclimated. Like a stray cat I was supposed to train before it took over the house. Kelsey didn't ask questions. She made announcements. These models feel a little rigid, she said, flipping through documentation I'd spent nearly a decade refining. What if we reframe our reporting cadence through a narrative-first lens? Investors connect with stories, not spreadsheets. Spreadsheets are stories, I said flat. They just don't come with background music. She laughed, too loud, too staged. Then waved over a junior analyst and asked him to email her a clean copy of my quarterly scenario models. I looked at her. She looked straight past me. That was week 1. Week 2, she told the partners it was time to sunset my legacy systems. Said they caused redundancy drag and slowed down innovative flow. She rolled out slides with slick gradients and more fonts than a ransom note. Half her numbers were rough guesses pulled from benchmarking blogs. Didn't matter. She looked right, talked fast, smiled like she believed every word. And the partners? They ate it up like artisanal hors d'oeuvres. I watched their eyes glaze over at phrases like decentralized ideation loops and paradigm diversification. No one noticed she never once mentioned risk variance or market decay curves. But she quoted Simon Sinek, so apparently that counted. They started inviting her to senior meetings I used to run. She'd come back with feedback like, they want more dynamism. I still don't know what that meant in our world. I'm not convinced she did either. I tried to stay professional. I really did. I offered twice to walk her through the logic behind our fixed income hedging model. She waved it off. Said it was 2016. I explained the compliance waterfall in our Monte Carlo simulations. She shrugged. Let's just simplify, she said. Clients want less friction. Sure. Yeah, let's all invest blindfolded because friction is inconvenient. The worst part wasn't the disrespect. I've dealt with interns who thought they were smarter than me before. That wasn't new. What hurt was watching everyone else let it happen. Watching people who trusted me with 8-figure accounts suddenly look away while she rearranged my furniture with me still sitting in the chair. Daniel, just help her transition, they kept saying. She brings a fresh lens. Right. A fresh lens. Like she was Marie Kondo into the firm's financial backbone, and I was just some dusty coffee mug taking up shelf space. So I went quiet. I stopped fixing her models. Stopped flagging the risks she missed. I didn't send reminders anymore. Instead, I started documenting every change, every version, every overwrite she wasn't authorized to make. I backed everything up. Twice. One copy on the internal server, another on a private encrypted drive. I printed hard copies of key compliance documents, the kind buried deep in the policy stack. Clause 17.2. Section 12C. Stuff I'd written and filed with legal years ago, back when no one else wanted to deal with it. Because I knew how this ended. I didn't need a crystal ball. The whispers were louder now. Kelsey was being introduced to clients. Her name started creeping onto decks. The transition wasn't a concept anymore. It was a schedule. And I wasn't on it. But here's the thing about legacy systems. They remember. They don't care about MBAs, white teeth, or who brought cupcakes to the team meeting. They care about credentials, keys, and permissions. And I was still the architect. Kelsey didn't know it yet, but every shortcut she took, every protocol she skipped was being logged. Not by accident. By design. I knew exactly what was coming the moment the calendar invite landed in my inbox. Subject line: Touch base HR. No details. No prep doc. Just a 15-minute slot wedged between a sandwich-making workshop and Kelsey's latest TED-style debrief on leadership through empathy. I showed up early. Of course I did. Muscle memory. I sat down in that beige room that smelled like printer toner and half-hearted apologies and waited. The HR director, Michelle, walked in holding a clipboard. Behind her was a junior associate who looked like she'd been coached not to make eye contact. I didn't bother with small talk. I leaned back, crossed one ankle over the other and said, "So is this the part where I act surprised?" Michelle tried to smile and landed somewhere between pity and constipation. "Daniel, as you know, we're undergoing a strategic realignment." "Ah yes, the corporate exorcism. Kelsey Monroe has been tasked with modernizing our analytical workflows," she continued. "She brings a lot of teeth," I said. She blinked. "Value. And with her background, Yale, we're confident she'll bring new energy to our client strategy verticals." There it was. The spell. The sacred phrase that erased 12 years of blood, brain, and bandwidth. "She has a Yale degree. You'll understand." What was I supposed to say? "Oh, in that case, please throw me out the window," while she misquotes GDP ratios to Fortune 100 clients? Instead, I smiled. Thin. Tired. "Sure. I understand." There was no exit interview. No warm handshake. No "we'll miss you." Just 3 plain cardboard boxes already waiting under the table. Like they'd rehearsed it. Hell, maybe they had. Michelle slid the NDA toward me. "Standard offboarding. Nothing unusual. We just ask that you don't discuss internal systems or architecture in any." I signed it before she finished the sentence. No pause. She looked startled. "You don't want to read it?" "Michelle," I said, capping the pen, "I wrote half the policies in that binder. And the other half," I added, "were copy-pasted from a consulting firm Kelsey couldn't even get hired at." The junior HR girl made a tiny gasp and immediately dropped her eyes, suddenly very interested in her notes. They offered me a black tote bag with the company logo slapped on the side. I waved it away. "No thanks. I already own enough things that don't mean what they say." Packing took exactly 21 minutes. The boxes were mostly manuals, binders, and 2 backup drives with barcode labels only legal ever noticed. I left the desk cleaner than I found it. No goodbye note. No framed photos. The only personal thing I took was a coffee mug that read "I excel under pressure." Felt a little ironic. When I walked out, no one looked up. Not because they didn't notice, because they did. The sound of my shoes on the tile echoed down the hallway like a funeral march for everyone's last excuse. Because if I could be tossed aside, nobody was untouchable. I reached the elevator. Hit the button. Waited. Behind me, someone from marketing said a little too loud, "Well, he was kind of set in his ways." I turned around. Slowly. Just once. "Tell me how that way performs," I said. "When you load next quarter's client dashboards and realize you fired the only guy who knew which numbers were real." The elevator dinged. I stepped inside. At 2 p.m., Daniel Mercer disappeared from the building. He'd held upright longer than most of them had been out of college. No scene. No tears. Just quiet. And here's the thing about quiet. It doesn't mean nothing's happening. It just means the sound is about to change. The glitch hit at 2:13 p.m., exactly 13 minutes after I swiped my badge for the last time. Kelsey Monroe was sitting at the head of the glossy glass conference table like a queen waiting for tribute. 2 senior partners flanked her, kombucha in hand, a color-coded pitch deck queued up for the 3 p.m. investor call. The plan was simple. Walk their biggest fund, Harborstone, through a newly streamlined allocation model. One she'd spent the last week butchering like a pig at a vegan retreat. She clicked the first slide. No problem. Slide 2. Nothing. The embedded screen flickered, then froze. A low mechanical hum filled the room. Then a gray overlay slid across the spreadsheet window, like a curtain dropping on opening night. A pop-up appeared in plain, bureaucratic text. Authorization required. Post-separation compliance key missing. Locked under Clause 17.2b. Kelsey blinked. What the hell is Clause 17.2? No one answered. because no one in that room knew. I'd written clause 17.2. She clicked again. Same error. Minimized. Reopened. Nothing. She tried pulling the file fresh from the dashboard library. Access denied. Another message flashed. Change attempt logged at 14:13. Critical models require named architect override if altered post-departure. System locked to preserve compliance. The junior IT analyst in the corner, who'd been told this meeting was just a formality, slowly raised his hand like he was back in kindergarten. I think that means the guy who built the model locked it if he left. Kelsey's jaw tightened. Are you saying I can't access the deck for the pitch I'm giving in? She glanced at the clock. 45 minutes? I mean technically you can see the slides, he stammered. But if any data moved, or if the system thinks a change happened without authorization. He stared at the frozen spreadsheet like it might explode. It just locks. Everything. One of the partners leaned forward. Override it. You have admin access, don't you? The IT guy swallowed. No, nobody does. Only Daniel had root-level access. And legal. And legal's out until Monday for the compliance retreat. Silence. Like steel being sharpened. I logged into the USPTO portal and updated the public record to match reality. Owner Bell Systems LLC. Primary inventor, Matthew Bell. Operational use license. None granted. Within 24 hours it would all be public. Searchable. Indexed. Visible to any due diligence team worth half a damn. And wouldn't you know it, later that same morning, buried inside a cheerful LinkedIn post, the startup CEO announced they were officially launching their Series C funding round. Excited to share that we're entering our next phase of growth. Big things coming, he wrote, smiling in a recycled headshot like he hadn't just stepped into quicksand. I knew this part of the dance. Series C meant deep dives, technical audits, architecture reviews, and yes, IP due diligence. Investors don't drop $40 million on something they don't fully own. And when that team ran a standard IP search, they'd find me. Not a trace of me. Not shared credit. Not developed in collaboration with. Just me. The system they bragged about in pitch decks, demoed at conferences, and built partnerships around? It lived on my servers first. And now it lived on my paperwork. Rick, of course, had no idea. Last I heard, he was busy picking out swag bags for investor meetings. Branded notebooks. Reusable water bottles. Because nothing says scalable like a bamboo thermos. I wasn't chasing applause. I didn't even think of it as revenge. This wasn't anger. It was structure. Controlled pressure. Like tightening a wrench one slow turn at a time until the bolt either gives or snaps. And it was starting to snap. Up to that point, everything was still quiet. No cease and desist letters. No lawyers pounding on the door. Just clean, verifiable proof that the engine running most of their operation wasn't legally attached to their balance sheet. I didn't need to knock. The Series C team would do that for me. And when they did, when someone finally asked, so who actually owns the core infrastructure? Rick wouldn't have an answer. But I would. I'd already written it. 3 words. License available. Inquire. They were about 40 minutes into the due diligence call when the first crack appeared. Started simple. Routine checklist stuff. A partner from Linscott Capital asked for documentation confirming ownership of all proprietary technology. We just need a clear chain of title for the infrastructure IP, she said like she was ordering lunch. Normal. Necessary. No alarms yet. Rick, smiling in his best Patagonia vest, replied, of course. All our systems are internally developed. That's when legal shifted in their chairs. One of the firm's attorneys, Rachel I think, muted herself to whisper something off camera. Then came the sentence that changed the room. We'll follow up with the patent documentation shortly. Rick missed it completely. He kept talking. Product velocity. DevOps metrics. Some buzzword soup about quantifying resilience at scale. But in another window inside a quiet breakout room, the startup's legal intern, poor kid, probably running on caffeine and regret, was staring at the USPTO website like it had just punched him in the chest. He ran the search twice to be sure. Matthew Bell. Independent inventor. Bell Systems LLC. Not a single reference to the company. He checked the chain of ownership filings. Nothing. No assignment. No transfer. No license. No shared ownership clause. The signature line for authorized representative of employer entity was blank. Untouched. The system wasn't just unassigned. It was deliberately unclaimed. He slowly slid the laptop across the table to senior legal. Their reaction wasn't loud. It's been there for years, someone said quietly. Baked right into the system. Another alert flashed across the screen, cold and final. Unauthorized changes detected. Compliance escalation triggered. Clause 17.2b in effect. And that's when the rewind started. You could almost see it happen. Every partner, every manager, every suit in that building mentally replaying years of meetings. The policy updates they skimmed, the emails they ignored. Subject lines like security protocol amendment, urgent suddenly coming back to haunt them. Somewhere deep in legal SharePoint graveyard sat a document I'd written years earlier. A dry little file outlining contingency architecture for post-separation control. Clause 17.2 wasn't a footnote. It was a deadbolt. It stated, in plain language, in the event of the named architect's separation from the firm, any critical model or high-risk financial system shall require a certified override from either the architect or the designated legal custodian before future modifications may proceed. And here was the fun part. The override wasn't digital. It was analog, in person. A rotating access code shared only between me and the firm's legal lead, Jill Thomason. Jill, who at that very moment was doing yoga in the Arizona desert. Which meant that until Monday morning, every high-risk client model, Harborstone included, was sealed behind an ethical wall built by a man they'd fired with no warning and a $12 tote bag. The murmuring started. You mean we can't change it? Who else has the code? Did we give him a non-compete? Did anyone actually read the NDA? And somewhere between a partner muttering a curse and someone else frantically Googling, Clause 17.2b Alton and Chase. The weight of it all finally landed. They hadn't just fired an analyst. They fired the designer. The architect. The one person who understood the skeleton holding up all those glossy decks and empty buzzwords. And I hadn't shouted. I hadn't posted on LinkedIn. I hadn't burned anything down. I just walked out and taken the keys with me. Someone call him. The CEO snapped, sweat now visible. Call him. Now. Kelsey, silent for the first time all day, finally whispered. He won't answer. Why not? She looked down. Because I told him last week we didn't need his outdated scaffolding anymore. The room went so quiet you could hear the air conditioning kick on. At 2:49 p.m., the Harborstone investor team was escorted into the lobby and offered espresso. At 2:50, the CEO was still staring at a locked screen, face to face with the consequences of one quiet man's foresight. I hadn't sabotaged a thing. I just followed the rules I wrote. And they forgot who wrote them. A few minutes later, Charlotte, the CEO's assistant, hit the pavement in heels meant for slow walks and polite smiles, not sprints. By the time she spotted my sedan parked just past the edge of the employee lot, she was sweating through her silk blouse, squinting against the sun bouncing off my windshield. I was in the driver's seat, calm, sunglasses on, black coffee in my hand, window cracked just enough to let the breeze in and keep the panic out. She hurried over, breathless, gripping the edge of the open window like it was a lifeline. Daniel, Jesus, hi, she gasped. We need you to come back inside. The model's locked. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I know. They said it needs a post-something. Post-separation compliance key, I said evenly. Clause 17.2b. It's in the documentation. Internal Systems Continuity Binder. Section 3. Tab 9. She stared at me. Can you just come in and unlock it? I'm not staff anymore, I said with a small shrug. HR was very clear about that. Daniel, the CEO, is asking, no begging, for you to come back. I'm honored, I said, sounding anything but. But I've got a meeting in 10 minutes. Wouldn't want to be late. A meeting? I tilted my phone so she could see the calendar alert glowing on the screen. Intro call. Grafton Equity Partners. Her eyes went wide. You're interviewing? I smiled. They reached out last quarter. Heard about the Harborstone model. Turns out they still respect legacy systems. She hesitated, clearly wanting to argue, then remembered why she was there. Look, they'll pay. Whatever it takes. They just need access. This is urgent. Everything they need, I said, nodding toward the building behind her, is already in there. In the protocols I wrote. If they'd read instead of rearranged, they wouldn't be in this mess. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Inside the glass-walled conference room, Kelsey was pacing, hands flying, like sheer volume might force a solution. I'm not locking anything, I said, half to myself. The system just doesn't recognize her authority. Charlotte dragged both hands through her hair. She says you sabotaged it. I turned slowly and finally looked her straight in the eye. Of course she does. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small USB drive. Want to see something? She hesitated, then nodded. I handed it to her. Logs from the last 10 days. Every attempt she made to rewrite the core modeling logic triggered a flag. The system auto-archived the originals, logged the deltas and timestamped everything. Compliance rule I built back when she was probably still padding her LinkedIn resume. Charlotte stared at the USB like it was radioactive. She tripped the lock, I said evenly. Not me. The system doesn't care about job titles. It cares about chain of custody. Back inside, Kelsey was doubling down. Pacing in front of the partners, voice raised just enough to spill into the hallway. This is sabotage, she snapped. He set this up to make me look incompetent. The junior IT analyst slowly shook his head. No, ma'am. You didn't follow protocol. You initiated structural changes without architect's sign-off. The system did exactly what it was designed to do. If anything, it's functioning perfectly. The CEO stepped out of the room like a man walking away from a wreck. His eyes locked on Charlotte outside the glass. She gave him a small shake of her head. No luck. He didn't even open the door. He just stared at me through the window for a moment, jaw clenched, then turned and walked back inside. Charlotte faced me again. Is there any chance you'd consider? I left quietly, I said. They made their call. I made mine. And for what it's worth. I nodded toward the USB still in her hand. That model will unlock itself Monday morning when legal gets back. If they make it that long. She swallowed. They won't. I gave her a small, almost sympathetic smile. Then maybe next time they'll keep the locksmith on payroll. The car eased forward unhurried, turning down the street with all the urgency of a weekend grocery run. Inside the firm, panic was spreading. Kelsey, once the queen of the room, was now trapped inside her own slide deck. Her voice went sharp. Her talking points collapsed under audit logs and blunt system alerts. And me? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't have to. I had something better. A system that didn't care who was in charge. Only who held the key. And the guy they called expendable? Yeah, I was untouchable now. Monday morning arrived like a funeral march dressed in business casual. The boardroom blinds were drawn for the first time in years. No lobby music. No pastries at the front desk. Just shuffling feet and weak coffee. A few interns passed each other in the hallway like kids sneaking past a haunted house. Eyes wide, mouths shut, hoping whatever ghost lived in the firm wouldn't notice them. And at exactly 9 a.m., I walked back into Alton and Chase. Not with a badge. With a contract. 6-month retainer. Independent status. Discretionary hours. Direct reporting line to the board. I was wearing the same wrinkled khakis and navy pullover they used to side-eye. Carrying the same beat-up thermos that had survived 3 market crashes and a merger. But this time no one smirked. This time people stood. The conference room was already full when I arrived. No familiar smiles. No welcome back. Just nods. Tight ones. Some embarrassed. Some angry, not at me but at themselves and at the moment they realized they'd confused shine for substance. HR met me in the glass lobby. New rep. Not Michelle, she was transitioning departments. This one looked barely out of college, but she had the good sense to lead with a handshake instead of a script. She's not here, the rep said quietly, like the walls might overhear. Kelsey. I raised an eyebrow. She's been placed on leave. Pending review. Of course she has. There was no satisfaction in my voice. Just inevitability. The contract was already waiting. Printed. Signed by legal. Stamped with the board's initials. A red folder sat at the head of the table like an offering. I opened it. Scanned the terms. Clause 4. Consultant shall not be treated as staff. Clause 6. Consultant shall be granted full system access. Clause 7. Consultant may amend architecture without prior board approval in matters of compliance risk. I slid the folder back across the table. No desk, I said. No company email. No team meetings. If I'm here, I'm consulting, not cleaning up after someone else. The board chair nodded. Understood. Another partner cleared his throat. Would you like to say a few words? Before we bring Harborstone in. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I don't do speeches, I said. I do systems that work. They nodded again. Like students. Not executives. Over the next few hours, I walked them through what they'd missed. Not the numbers they could read, but the why underneath them. The logic. The integrity behind every cascading formula they'd swapped out for buzzwords and shiny charts. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't accuse. I just laid out the blueprint they tried to pave over and let them connect the dots themselves. By the time Harborstone's team arrived, everything ran clean. Models loaded. Dashboards updated. Risk scenarios adjusted in real time. It wasn't flashy. It was just correct. And Kelsey? Her name never came up. Not once. Not as an excuse. Not as a footnote. It was like the building had swallowed the memory of her and moved on. I didn't mention her either. I wasn't there to gloat. I wasn't there to wave a contract or say, I told you so. I was there because I'd built something that mattered, and watched them nearly torch it for a brand refresh and a polished resume. Now they were paying me to rebuild it. And this time I wasn't asking for a seat. They'd set the table around me. As the meeting wrapped up, one partner, an older guy with a comb-over and a gravelly voice, leaned in and whispered, You could have burned us to the ground. I shook my head. Didn't need to. I stood, picked up my folder. I nodded once. Because vindication doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it's just walking back through the same door they shoved you out of, with your name on the contract and their signature at the bottom. The room smelled like old toner and fresh humility. I sat at the far end of the boardroom table, sleeves rolled up, binder open, red pen in my hand. Across from me were two legal associates, both scribbling notes while pretending not to. A compliance liaison hovered near the door, tight-lipped, like someone who just realized every alarm had been blaring for months, and I'd been the only one listening. Clause by clause, line by line, I rebuilt the system access structure they'd been so eager to tear apart. This time, nothing was buried in Appendix C or tucked under future contingencies. This time it was front and center. Bolded. Initialed. Primary Systems Architect, Daniel Mercer. Required authentication for core modeling access, Daniel Mercer. Override authority for post-separation lockouts, Daniel Mercer or direct legal custodian. No ceremony. No speeches. Just the quiet sound of permanence being written down. When they offered to put my name back on the internal roster, I shook my head. Not interested in joining the cast, I said. Just make sure the script stays intact. No one argued. That afternoon, Kelsey's entire project library was reopened for audit. Her agile realignment plans. Her investor storyboards. Her simplified dashboards. All of it dragged into compliance review. Led by the same junior staff she used to correct with condescension and passive-aggressive sticky notes. By 3 p.m., most of it was gone. The rest was tagged for structural revision, which is just corporate code for let's pretend this never happened. The firm slid back into my original frameworks, the ones built for durability, not quarterly applause. The partners stopped asking about narrative dynamism and started asking about margin of error tolerances again. Everything slowed down. In the right way, like an engine finally running at the RPM it was designed for. By Thursday, the CEO asked for a private meeting. No assistants. No advisors. Just the two of us in the same conference room where Kelsey once announced she was going to disrupt legacy inertia. He looked smaller now. Worn down. Collar unbuttoned, like even his shirt had given up. He slid the final copy of the retainer across the table. Signed. Sealed. I should have asked, he said quietly. Before I assumed. I nodded once. You assumed I'd stay while you erased my name from my own work. He didn't argue. Didn't push back. Just stared at the table, waiting for something heavier than silence. I won't be on calls, I said. I won't sit in meetings. You send me what you need. If I flag an issue, you fix it. No debates. Understood. And I don't want a title. He looked up. Why? Because titles are what got you into this mess, I said. You handed someone a crown before they earned a kingdom. He closed his eyes and let that land. I stood, slung my bag over my shoulder. One more thing, he said. Anything else you need? I paused at the door. Didn't turn around. Black coffee, I said. No cream. That was it. No victory lap. No speeches. Just a man asking for his usual, like nothing had happened. But everything had. Kelsey's office was empty now. Nameplate gone. No farewell cake. No LinkedIn post. Just a quiet HR handoff. A shadow in the hallway where her heels used to echo. The systems carried my name again. But more importantly, they worked. And everyone knew why. The room was spotless. Air scrubbed. Glass polished. The Alton and Chase logo etched into the far wall like it meant something again. The quarterly investor summit was back in person for the first time since the mess. No one said it out loud, but the mood had shifted. Calmer. Cleaner. Less performance, more substance. The slides were fewer. The numbers tighter. And for once, there was no panic humming behind the curtain. Harborstone sat at the center table. Suits sharp. Eyes sharper. The CEO opened without flair. No buzzwords. No theatrics. Just data. Stability. Language like risk-adjusted integrity metrics and compliance continuity controls, laid out like armor instead of decoration. Every chart carried weight. Every projection could stand up in daylight. No fluff. No color-coded charisma. Just clarity. I sat in the back row. No badge. No name tag. No spotlight. Just a notepad on my knee and black coffee in my hand. I didn't fidget. Didn't whisper. I just watched the system speak for itself. At slide 14, the CEO paused. This, he said, pointing to the live model simulation, is only possible because of a structural mind behind our safeguards. Someone who understood that flexibility doesn't mean fragility. That resilience has to be designed, not wished for. A few heads turned. No one said my name. They didn't need to. On the screen, a clause reference appeared in the footer. 17.2b. Architectural Compliance Protocol. I let out a slow breath. Not pride. Not satisfaction. Just closure. The junior analyst next to me, maybe 2 years out of school, probably too young to remember 2008, leaned over and whispered, "Isn't that the guy they let go?" I didn't react. I stood up, slid my notepad into my coat pocket, and tossed my empty coffee cup into the bin beside the door without breaking stride. Briefly, I said, pulling on my coat, I just forgot to take the keys with me. Then I walked out. Quietly. Behind me, the firm finally remembered how to stand on its own. Because the best systems don't ask for credit. They just work. Long after you're gone.